today. This resolution addresses the security of maritime navigation in the Arabian Gulf, constituting a decisive and responsible response to grave developments affecting one of the most vital waterways for international trade, namely the Strait of Hormuz. The international significance of the Strait of Hormuz lies in the fact that it serves as a transit route for approximately 38% of global crude oil trade, 29% of liquefied petroleum gas, 19% of liquefied natural gas, and 20% of refined petroleum products, including high sulfur oil, which constitutes an essential component in the production of fertilizers upon which developing nations heavily rely, particularly during agricultural seasons. Furthermore, the Straits facilitates the passage of about 30% of the world's helium supplies, a vital element in the electronic chip manufacturing industry, as well as foodstuffs and pharmaceuticals essential to the lives of millions of people. Consequently, any disruption to the flow of these resources does not merely impact energy markets. Its effects extend to agricultural supply chains and global food security, as well as to vital sectors dependent on advanced technology. The member states of the Gulf Cooperation Council represent the primary source of global energy supplies. This renders the security of the Strait of Hormuz a shared international responsibility, one that transcends the regional sphere to directly bear upon the stability of the global economy. Therefore, we declare loudly and unequivocally before this Council, which is charged with the maintenance of international peace and security, that the Islamic Republic of Iran has no right to close this waterway to international navigation, nor to deprive the peoples of the world of these resources essential for life. In doing so, it violates international law, the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, and fundamental ethical and humanitarian principles. Should your esteemed Council permit the Strait to remain closed today, such a scenario would inevitably be replicated in other straits and waterways, thereby transforming the world into a jungle where force, arrogance, and hegemony prevail, and where international laws are utterly disregarded. The draft resolution currently before the Council comes at a moment of extreme criticality and sensitivity as Iran persists in its unlawful aggression against our nations, employing thousands of ballistic missiles and drones, targeting civilian infrastructure and vital installations, as well as the security of navigation. This constitutes a flagrant violation of the United Nations Charter and international law, especially international humanitarian law. This is also a direct threat to regional and international peace and security, and an explicit violation of Security Council Resolution 2817, which was adopted just 30 days ago. It is also a violation of Human Rights Council Resolution L38, adopted 2 weeks ago. The Islamic Republic of Iran's disregard for international resolutions and its insistence on threatening the security of international navigation is neither a sudden emergency nor a spur-of-the-moment occurrence. Rather, it is part of a well-documented pattern of negative conduct, Indeed, the Security Council has previously addressed threats to security of navigation in the Arabian Gulf, unequivocally condemning them in Resolution 552 of 1984. Furthermore, the international community remains acutely aware of Iran's recurring pattern of resorting to economic blockades and threats regarding the closure and disruption of the Strait of Hormuz, rather than opting for diplomatic relations founded upon prioritizing mutual interests, reciprocal cooperation, and the principles of good neighborliness. The region has witnessed similar precedents in 2011, 2012, and 2019 through the targeting of oil tankers and repeated statements regarding the use of the Strait of Hormuz as a political and economic bargaining chip. The draft resolution before you does not create a new reality. It rather constitutes a serious response to a pattern of recurring hostile Iranian behavior that must cease, and serves as an implementation of paragraph 6 of Resolution 552. 42 years after the adoption of Resolution 552, we urge the international community today, and this esteemed council specifically, to take a firm, serious, and resolute position against irresponsible practices that attempt, to no avail, to impose a unilateral economic encirclement upon the nations and peoples of the world. These practices and acts of aggression have transcended their regional impact, directly affecting the stability of the global economy and international food security. The World Food Programme has warned that the closure of the strait has driven up the costs of fuel, transport, and food. Furthermore, a continued closure of the strait could push nearly 45 million additional people into acute levels of food insecurity. A situation that demands urgent and responsible international action. Excellencies, in light of the global turbulence witnessed today, it is no longer possible to ignore the fact that the obstruction of navigation in the Strait of Hormuz represents a systematic pattern of behavior, one predicated on weaponizing this vital waterway as a tool for political pressure and leverage. Let us be clear. A failure to act today would entail grave consequences for the world and for humanity. It would embolden further violations of international law, undermine the credibility of the Security Council, and send a negative message, namely that Security Council resolutions may be disregarded with impunity. The economic and humanitarian crisis confronting us today poses a fundamental question to the Security Council and the international community. Will the international community accept being held hostage to attempts at economic blackmail, regardless of the perpetrator? Will your esteemed council shoulder its responsibility to confront these blatant aggressions, which are actions that contravene international law, show no respect for its resolutions, and indeed completely disregard them? The adoption of this resolution by your esteemed council today will send a strong and unified message, on the other hand. a message that we stand united in upholding international law, that we will protect civilians, global trade, and food security, that we will safeguard the vital supply chains for advanced technology, thereby ensuring continued global technological progress for the well-being of humanity, and that we will not permit the vital international waterways are threatened or blocked. Excellencies, the Kingdom of Bahrain's non-permanent membership in the Security Council, coupled with our presidency of the Council during this current month of April, has placed us before a challenge of the utmost sensitivity, namely, to protect the interests of our affected nations and of the entire world, while simultaneously preserving the unity of the Security Council, ensuring that the Council remains united in its stances and resolutions. Consequently, and following continuous negotiations and extensive discussions, we have strived to ensure that this draft resolution is balanced, implementable, and capable of achieving the desired objectives. A united council to ensure safe maritime navigation. We therefore urge all members of the Security Council to support this draft resolution for the Council's credibility, the security and stability of our region, the growth of the global economy, the preservation of food security and technological advancement. All depend upon the decision of your esteemed Council. Thank you.
I shall now make a statement. No, I did. I resume my function as President of the Council. I shall put the draft resolution to the vote now. Will those in favor of the draft resolution contained in document S/2026/273 please raise their hand. Those against? Abstentions? The results. The result of the voting is as follows: 11 votes in favor, 2 votes against, 2 abstentions. The draft resolution has not been adopted owing to the negative vote of a permanent member of the Council. I now give the floor to those members of the Council who wish to make statements after the vote. I shall now make a statement in my capacity as Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Kingdom of Bahrain.
Your Excellencies, my country, the Kingdom of Bahrain, and the United Arab Emirates, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, the State of Qatar, the State of Kuwait, and the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan express their regret that the resolution presented before you today has not been adopted. The Council failed to shoulder its responsibility in relation to an illegal conduct that requires decisive action with no delay. We had hoped that the draft resolution would present a step towards a permanent solution that will ensure freedom of navigational freedom in the Strait of Hormuz as an international waterway that no country has the right to obstruct navigation in it according to international law. In this connection, we reiterate that the voice of international community, as represented in this Council and its resolution 2718 of 2026, which expressed the imposition of obligations that should be implemented with no delay. Any inaction in this regard will undermine the credibility of the Council and emboldens to commit more violations. Accordingly, we call on the Islamic Republic of Iran to fully comply to these obligations and to constructively cooperate with the international community instead of continue to adopt policies of escalation and to employ ballistic missiles and launch drones against neighboring countries. The attacks that your Council has called for their stop and end, and we call on Iran to stop its attempts to create a reality that is based on threat, economic pressure by obstructing navigation in the Strait of Hormuz, as this will have consequences on energy security, medicine, food supplies, international trade in the world at large. Your Excellencies, threats to navigational freedom and regional security are not subject to statute of limitation. These challenges are persistent, which require collective action and decisive action. Accordingly, we stress that our countries will continue to work in coordination with their partners and allies to ensure the navigational freedom and the protection of international maritime waterways, to prevent the recurrence of these threats, to ensure security of international economy and maintain interests of international community. The draft resolution, which has not been adopted by your esteemed Council, reflects an urgent response to serious developments which created a direct threat to freedom of maritime navigation and impacted the safety and stability of international trade, energy markets, and food and medicine supplies. The draft has also aimed to consolidate principles of international law in relation to navigational freedom and ensure that waterways are not used as bargaining ships or tools of blackmailing. Failing to adopt this resolution sends the wrong signal to the peoples of the world, the signal that the threat to international waterways can pass without any decisive action by the international organization responsible for the maintenance of international peace and security. Threat to close the Strait of Hormuz and using it as a pressure card before the world is not anything new. It is a repeated conduct used by Iran for decades. Every time it has been used, it had direct implications on global markets, energy security, and food supplies, and the lives of the peoples of the region. We consider that The inaction of the Council and its failing to address this situation decisively will lead to entrench this kind of conduct and behavior that is irresponsible and that is contravening with international law. It will expand the scope of its risks, which is a threat to the stability of the world order. The Arab Gulf is not far from your countries, not in geography or economy. It is in the heart of your stability and prosperity. Its security is your security. And the Gulf countries are not only providing the energy supplies which move world economy, they contribute to the stability of the markets and they support the supply chains, and they are a reliable investment and commercial partner, in particular the developing countries and countries of the South, which find themselves in the front line of those impacted by this crisis. And they bear the disproportionate cost of any disruption in supply chains and disruption of energy markets. Our countries contribute to the development of future industries, including the supply chains and the associated technologies. We host communities of qualified people from all over the world. Your people are working side by side with ours in an environment based on security, dignity, equal opportunity, and aspired and shared future. Your Excellencies, failing to adopt the resolution today does not change the reality on the ground. It does not protect the civilian seafarers. It does not secure global supply chains. It does not ensure the free flow of energy and trade. It does not exempt those responsible for the violations of international law from accountability. It raises questions about the ability of this Council to assume its responsibility in maintaining international peace and security. Let us be clear. The attacks by Iran against the commercial vessels and its attempts to hinder the legitimate passage through the Strait of Hormuz is a flagrant violation to international law and the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea. It is a direct threat to international peace and security. Failing to adopt this resolution does not give legitimacy to these actions, which adversely impact the interests of the peoples and states of the world. It does not weaken the existing legal obligations. It does not reduce or impair the right of states to take all necessary means to defend individually and collectively their sovereignty, security, stability, and interests, and the interests of the peoples and states of the region consistent with Article 51 of the Charter as enshrined in your Resolution 2817. Your Excellencies, the Kingdom of Bahrain regrets that the Council has not lived up to the moment to act in a unified manner as imposed by its legal responsibilities. Notwithstanding the response and the cooperation we have extended in relation to the amendments required by some states to be included in the draft resolution. This comes from our interest in maintaining unity of the Council. We reiterate, we will continue to work with our regional and international partners to ensure maritime freedom and navigational freedom, and to protect civilian lives, and to work with esteemed Council to compel Iran to implement immediately Resolution 2817. The credibility of the Council is today at stake. It's not an abstract concept. The credibility is measured by the ability of the Council to move decisively when the situation so requires. As to the responsibility, it remains to exist, and the Kingdom of Bahrain will continue to shoulder this responsibility alongside all those who uphold international law and those who believe in justice and the right of peoples to live in dignity and equality without fear from the future. Thank you.
I resume my function as President of the Council. I give the floor to the representative of the United States.
Thank you, Mr. President, for your statement. In mine, I want to be clear. I want to be very clear that the United States stands with Bahrain. The United States stands with the people of the Gulf at this moment of reckoning. Colleagues, this is a time for choosing, and the countries that just opposed this resolution, led by the Kingdom of Bahrain, have chosen to oppose them. Just over 3 weeks ago, this council adopted a resolution which garnered a record-setting, a UN record of 136 co-sponsors with no opposition in this council. It was the most supported resolution in UN history, and that resolution clearly demanded that Iran immediately cease its attacks and threats against neighboring states and condemned its obstruction of safe civilian shipping through the Strait of Hormuz. As President Trump explained in his statement last week to the nation and the world, we are here because Iran's tyrannical regime has persisted for decades in escalating its attacks against the American people, our allies in the region, and the world's commercial fleets, in flagrant violation of international law and nearly a dozen resolutions from the United Nations Security Council. Colleagues, 47 years ago, the Iranian regime's first act was to take dozens of Americans hostage. Now, it's taking the Strait of Hormuz hostage, and with it, attempting to take the world's economy hostage. Well, colleagues, that may be its last act. We'll see. Iran has laid mines in the strait. They are firing upon civilian commercial vessels. These vessels are carrying fertilizer, oil, medical supplies, other critical goods around the world. They are threatening the entire world with energy shortages, disrupted supply chains, and possibly even famine. The Iranian regime has deliberately chosen to broaden their war to the Gulf by firing on our allies, not just U.S. military bases, but shooting in all directions. Just against the United Arab Emirates alone, Iran has fired over 500 ballistic missiles, over 2,000 drones, dozens of sophisticated cruise missiles. Again, not against military targets, against resorts and ports and hotels and civilian neighborhoods in absolute and flagrant violation of international law. The Kingdom of Bahrain has sustained thousands more ballistic missiles, drones, cruise missiles, again, against civilian neighborhoods. Iran has deliberately chosen to broaden their war even further. Iran's foreign minister, Arachi, has stated now the Strait of Hormuz is now Iranian territory. That's quite the pronouncement. And that they will treat it as their own territory. Again, holding the world's economy hostage. This was their choice to deny the world oil that's needed to heat their homes, African and South Asian states who need grain and fertilizer to pass freely through the strait in time for planting season in spring. As we speak, colleagues, as we speak right now, 80 UN and international humanitarian groups delivering medical aid, shelter, supplies, and food to humanitarian crises in the Congo, in Sudan, in Gaza, cannot pass through the strait. No one should tolerate that they are holding the global economy at gunpoint. But today, Russia and China did tolerate it. They sided with a regime that seeks to intimidate the Gulf into submission, even as it brutalizes its own people during a national internet blackout for daring to imagine dignity or freedom. Now it seeks to punish the world as cynical leverage in its death to America approach to foreign policy. Colleagues, the blight Iran has inflicted upon us, you, and its own people, it did not begin on March 11th. It did not begin February 28th or even today. For nearly half a century, the Islamic Republic of Iran, the world's leading state sponsor of terrorism, has built its reason for existence on the violent exporting of a revolution. It's built its reason for existence on intimidation and terror. And I commend Bahrain and everyone who voted with this resolution for saying enough is enough. It has attacked American embassies. It has murdered hundreds of American diplomats, service members, and civilians. It has bombed American barracks and businesses. It has tried to bomb our cities. It has even repeatedly conspired and failed to assassinate the President of the United States. The perpetrator of that Iranian plot was just convicted right down the street in Brooklyn in an American court. Thank God. This year alone, multiple agents of the Iranian government were convicted and intercepted in other plots to kill the president and an American-Iranian dissident who spoke right here at this council, Masa Alinejad, all in clear violation of Security Council Resolution 1373, which prohibits states from supporting acts of terror. 47 years and counting, colleagues, Iran has campaigned against peace in the region by any means necessary. Just this January, it slaughtered tens of thousands of its own citizens, as we discussed right here in this council. But yet, the regime then promised no more executions on its citizens. But what are they doing? Violating that promise, and instead are slaughtering, on average, one Iranian per day. People who dare to protest their own government. Iran has also armed terrorist proxies, targeted civilians, strangled shipping lanes, and destabilized governments. As a 2019 UN Secretary General report affirmed, it has hidden and encouraged its proxies to hide behind civilians and civilian infrastructure to attack Americans and our allies. The Secretary General himself affirmed Iran hides military hardware in hospitals and schools and civilian neighborhoods for propaganda purposes in the most sick and despicable way. Don't take that from me. Take that from the Secretary General and his own report. And now, according to the UN's UNICEF, the IRGC is openly recruiting children as young as 12 to be child soldiers. Right now, as their country suffers, they are spending millions per day to enforce an internet blackout on those same civilians and those same children that they are executing for daring to protest. Why is all of this happening? Because regional peace is a threat to Iran. Apparently, it's not good, or apparently it's bad for China and Russia too. It exposes the Iranian regime for what it is, which is a dictatorship punching at the kneecaps of its neighbors who have realized a better future for their people. Just across the Strait of Hormuz, cities like Dubai, Doha, and Manama, and Riyadh beckon the Iranian people for a better future. That's the threat, colleagues. That's what the regime doesn't want to see for its own people. Right across the Gulf, there is a brighter, better future, a different model. And they will not have it, and they're attacking it at every turn. I recently heard, colleagues, from an Iranian dissident, one who has been repeatedly harassed, threatened, and is in hiding. This Iranian dissident told me, do you know what the Iranian people fear the most? They fear that America will stop. They fear that we'll stop too soon. And that a new future, this is from the dissident, a new future, one who looks like what its Gulf neighbors have provided, will not come for them. Well, today, colleagues, certain countries stood in the way of that future, and the United States voted to protect that future. Mr. President, it is not lost on us that as we speak, your people, our allies across the Gulf, and American service members in the region are under a barrage of Iranian missiles and drones. They and you have shown great bravery. It is sad and unfortunate that Russia and China have not. We have long known that these countries are capable of paralyzing the Council through obstruction and manufactured confusion. Today's veto marks a new low, and it shows just how frightening a safer, more secure, more united Middle East can be. Colleagues, the rejection of this resolution will be explained today. You will hear today a number of excuses. You will hear that this was part of the U.S. campaign to ensure that the world is free of Iran's nuclear program. I will note today's result does not restrict the United States to continue to act in its own self-defense and in the collective defense of our allies and partners, and President Trump will continue the actions necessary to defend our people and the free world. The request from Bahrain and from the region was not unreasonable. They engaged every country on this council and took their inputs and thoughts on board. It was a simple resolution. Iran must stop attacking the Gulf, stop threatening its neighbors, and reopen the Strait of Hormuz. And I would note, colleagues, that Russia and China might have chosen better partners than Iran. They might have chosen to stand with our Gulf allies, with Manama, with Doha, with Abu Dhabi and Kuwait City and others. But instead, Russia has chosen to be a critical supplier of military equipment to Iran over the past year, in particular, delivering combat aircraft, helicopters, armored vehicles, and other arms to Iran, some of which violate Security Council Resolution 1929. Iran likewise has supplied Russia with hundreds of attack UAVs and UAV technology for use in Ukraine, including transfers before October 2023, and therefore in violation of Security Council Resolution 2231, which placed an arms embargo on Iran, voted by this council. And in September 2024, Iran began delivering hundreds of close-range ballistic missiles to Russia. Meanwhile, China imports over 80% of Iran's illicit oil, and Chinese entities have exported significant quantities of components intended for attack drones and technologies that could be used in ballistic missiles. Colleagues, let us be clear. In the coming days, when critical shipments are delayed, when fertilizer fails to reach countries that need it for planting season, when vulnerable populations face deepening food insecurity, the world will know exactly who chose obstruction over responsibility. So, despite today's outcome, let me reiterate two simple messages from the United States. First, the U.S. stands firmly with our partners in the Middle East. Second, the Strait of Hormuz is too vital to the world to be used as hostage, to be choked, to be weaponized by any one state. Colleagues, let me be frank. Most member states here need the Strait of Hormuz more than the United States does. Still, as this council knows, the U.S. has consistently pursued a diplomatic resolution even as we continue to achieve our objectives in Operation Epic Fury. We have put serious diplomatic proposals before Iran. The U.S. remains prepared for meaningful diplomacy, but diplomacy cannot succeed where defiance, delay, and escalation remain Tehran's only response. We are grateful to our mediating partners for their continued effort to secure a peaceful resolution, but Iran has to choose one. Colleagues, Iran is a direct threat to international peace and security. It is responsible for its own thuggery, and it alone is responsible for the ramifications. The book I live by, in that book, God has, quote, provided a way out, end quote. And even now, on the heels of Holy Week, Iran can also choose to reverse its decision to reopen the strait, to seek peace, and to make amends. But until then and afterwards, we call on responsible nations to join us in securing the Strait of Hormuz, protecting it, ensuring that it remains open to lawful commerce, to humanitarian goods, and the free movement of the world's goods. Mr. President, the United States and its allies will protect our interests, our people, and a better future for all, even while members of this council, partnered with the Iranian regime, work to do the exact opposite. I thank you.
I thank the representative of the United States. I give the floor to the representative of Panama.
Gracias.
Thank you, Mr. President. Panama welcomes Bahrain's leadership in putting forward and leading this negotiation process, as well as for the efforts that it has made to bring positions between members of the Council closer together. Panama recognizes the critical importance of safeguarding by all parties and at all times the protection of the civilian population and critical infrastructure, as well as ensuring maritime security and freedom of navigation in the Strait of Hormuz, which is an essential waterway for international commerce, energy security, and global economic stability. We reiterate our solidarity and our support for the countries of the Gulf and all of those affected by attacks on civilian infrastructure and international navigation in this important strategic area. In the context of an escalation which was not begun nor sought by these states and the consequences of which they are currently directly facing. Panama co-sponsored and voted in favor of Resolution 2817/2026, through which this Council condemned the attacks on countries of the Gulf, reaffirmed respect for their sovereignty and territorial integrity, and demanded an immediate cessation of such attacks. Panama also wishes to underscore and welcome the position of containment demonstrated by countries of the Gulf in the current context, which, despite having been subject to attacks, voted not to escalate the situation through the exercise of proportionate responses, which in the legitimate right to self-defense contained in Article 51 of the UN Charter. Panama understands from our own historic experience what it means to be the subject of action that attack or undermine the sovereignty, territorial integrity, security, and economic stability of a country, as well as understanding that the Security Council will not be able to act with the due promptness and effectiveness required by the situation. The cruelty of the current escalation and the intensification of the strikes that we are seeing at the moment strengthens our firm belief that this Council cannot stand by in light of situations that have direct impacts on international peace and security. Panama reiterates that the first essential step to contain the escalation in the region is an immediate cessation of hostilities by all parties, with the approach and demand put forward by my delegation, which we have put forward throughout this negotiation process and that we reiterate to this Council today. This position reflects our firmly held belief that there is no military solution to the current escalation and that no sustainable solution can be reached without prioritizing dialogue, diplomacy, and negotiation as fundamental measures for the settlement of international disputes. Mr. President, Panama welcomes the efforts made throughout the negotiation process to reflect the various perspectives of the members of the Council, in particular, the inclusion of language relating to respect for the sovereignty, territorial integrity, and political independence of states, as well as the substantive adjustments subsequently made following the end of negotiations on the text, which specify the defensive nature of the measures contemplated, since this is a crucial element that contributed to bringing positions of members of the Council closer together. We insist that any measure that would be taken under the framework of this resolution should be implemented not only with this defensive purpose in mind, but also always strictly in accordance with international law, including international humanitarian law and international human rights law, with full observance for the protection of the civilian population and civilian infrastructure. Mr. President, Panama, as the sovereign owner and responsible operator of the Panama Canal, and as the holder of one of the largest registers of maritime shipping, notes that particularly sensitively, any step that might affect the predictability, security of international navigation. These considerations have direct and concrete implications for our country to the extent that escalation-based scenarios might have harmful repercussions on other strategic routes. In light of the urgency of the situation and the need for the Security Council to act, Panama resolved to support the adoption of the resolution, which in its final version adopted a tone which allowed us to support it, always under the understanding that the mandate derived from this adoption would be interpreted and applied responsibly and specifically by all parties. This vote reflects a responsible decision geared towards ensuring reducing greater risk for the civilian population and critical infrastructure, as well as to contributing to easing the tensions and supporting international navigation and waterways. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Panama, and I give the floor to the representative of Colombia.
Mr. President, Colombia notes with profound concern the developments of the situation in the Middle East, a situation which is now entering its 6th week without clear signs of de-escalation. My country regrets the loss of human life and condemns all attacks on civilians, civilian objects, and essential infrastructure, including energy installations, whose operation is essential to ensuring the supply of basic services. At the same time, Colombia recognizes the strategic importance of the Strait of Hormuz for international commerce and energy security. Effects on maritime security have impacts that transcend the region and particularly affect developing countries. For this reason, my delegation participated actively in the negotiations and put forward proposals aimed at balancing the text, introducing greater clarity regarding the scope of the measures contemplated and avoiding broad wording which might give rise to interpretations overstepping the objective of guaranteeing free security of navigation. This in line with the principles and purposes of the United Nations Charter and international law. We thank Bahrain for the efforts made to address some of the positions and concerns expressed by members of the Council. Nonetheless, there remain substantive aspects that were not fully resolved and in light of which my country continues to have serious concerns. In particular, my delegation believes that the text remains selective, unbalanced, and ambiguous. In addition, Colombia is concerned that the lack of legal precision in the text could lend itself to interpretations that surpass the planned objective and would have broader implications for regional stability, including the risk of expanding the conflict or driving dynamics that could involve more actors in a situation that is already so volatile. For this reason, and since we believe that the text before us today is far from contributing to a negotiated solution, Colombia abstained in the vote. My country believes that in the current context, the Council should send clear messages geared towards containment and preventing a greater escalation. Furthermore, Colombia believes it's fundamental to give space to ongoing mediation efforts. In this context, measures that ramp up the confrontation run the risk of undermining these opportunities and hampering progress towards negotiated and sustainable solutions. We regret that the Security Council has missed this opportunity to provide a unified response that would contribute effectively to easing the tensions and opening space for peace. We reaffirm our solidarity with our colleagues from Bahrain, the Gulf, and all countries in the region. At the same time, we reiterate the urgent call for a cessation of hostilities, respect for international law, and for the promotion of dialogue as the only path towards resolving this crisis, because peace is inside. Thank you.
Representative of Colombia for the statement. I give the floor to the representative of Pakistan.
Thank you, Mr. President. At the outset, let me reiterate Pakistan's continued and unwavering support and complete solidarity in these challenging times with the brotherly kingdom of Bahrain and other fraternal GCC countries, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Kuwait, United Arab Emirates, and Oman, as well as Jordan, countries that are not parties to the ongoing conflict in the Middle East, but are directly suffering from its consequences. Pakistan supports the sovereignty, territorial integrity, political independence, and security of all brotherly countries in the region. President, The Strait of Hormuz is an important international shipping route for goods and energy. Pakistan calls for the security of ships and crew members and the swift and safe passage of civilian ships and restoration of normal passage through the strait. The situation in the Strait of Hormuz is adversely impacting countries around the world, including Pakistan. The consequences for regional and global economy are evidently harsh, and ordinary Pakistanis are also suffering. South Asia, that is home to nearly a quarter of world population, is suffering. The ongoing situation in the Strait of Hormuz has resulted in one of the largest energy supply shocks in modern history. The impact is felt not only in terms of energy flows, but also fertilizers and other essential commodities, thus affecting food security, cost of living, and squeezing the livelihoods of the most vulnerable. If the military escalation and disruptions persist, the suffering will extend far beyond the region, translating into widespread economic hardship. We thank Bahrain for their hard work and extensive consultations on the draft resolution. We agree on the urgency of the situation and the fundamental premise of the draft resolution, which is the reopening of the Strait of Hormuz and normalization of the situation at the earliest. This is an important issue, not only for the GCC countries, but also for all other states in the region and beyond, including Pakistan. It is also logical, Mr. President, that any discussion or arrangement related to the Strait of Hormuz will have to take into account the legitimate interests of the GCC countries. Pakistan supported Resolution 2817 that was presented by Bahrain on behalf of the GCC last month. And we have consistently maintained that that resolution should be implemented in letter and spirit. However, we continue to believe that time and space must be allowed for ongoing diplomatic efforts to facilitate a return to dialogue and engagement. These efforts have been widely acknowledged and appreciated, including by the UN Secretary General and members of this Council. We would continue seeking a durable diplomatic solution of the prevailing situation. This is the fundamental foundation of our ongoing diplomatic efforts, which we are determined to continue to pursue. At this critical juncture, restraint, diplomacy, and dialogue must prevail. Pakistan has been actively engaged in diplomatic efforts towards that end in concert with its partners in the region and beyond. The Deputy Prime Minister and Foreign Minister of Pakistan, Senator Muhammad Ishaq Dar, hosted the foreign ministers of Egypt, Saudi Arabia, and Turkey in Islamabad last week to advance the pursuit of a peaceful resolution of the ongoing crisis through intensified diplomatic engagement. After the Deputy Prime Minister's meeting with His Excellency Mr. Wang Yi, the Foreign Minister of China, in Beijing last week, China and Pakistan announced a 5-point initiative with a sequenced roadmap encapsulating an immediate halt to hostilities, launch of inclusive peace talks, protection of civilians and critical infrastructure, restoration of maritime security in the Strait of Hormuz, and a firm reaffirmation of the UN Charter and international law as the indispensable framework for a lasting political settlement. President, our objective is clear: a permanent end to hostilities, containing the expansion of this conflict and preventing any further loss of civilian life or destruction of critical infrastructure. Pakistan remains committed to continue playing its constructive role in promoting dialogue, fostering understanding, and supporting all efforts aimed at achieving lasting peace in the region. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Pakistan for the statement. I give the floor to the representative of France.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, France deplores the fact that the draft resolution, which was tabled by Bahrain, was not able to be adopted owing to the veto cast by a permanent member of the Security Council. We wish to thank Bahrain for the efforts of consultation which were undertaken over the course of negotiations on this text, which deserved the support of the full Council. France voted in favor of this draft resolution because of freedom of navigation, maritime safety and security in the Strait of Hormuz are of critical importance for the stability of the Middle East and for international stability, and because the text, in our view, contained a part of the means necessary to contribute to this. Mr. President, for a number of weeks now, Iran has de facto been blocking the Strait of Hormuz. France condemned Iranian attacks targeting commercial vessels, and we voiced our concern in light of the risk of mines there. This interference and obstruction constitutes a violation of the right of the law of the seas and undermines global provisions in energy and fertilizer. The consequences are reverberating for the entire global economy and particularly afflicting the most vulnerable populations. This obstruction must cease and freedom of navigation must be restored. On the 11th of March last, the Security Council adopted Resolution 2817, resolution which condemned Iran's indiscriminate strikes targeting Iran and Jordan, and targeting the Gulf states and Jordan. This resolution, which France supported and co-sponsored, recalls that rights and freedoms of navigation in the Strait of Hormuz must be respected under all circumstances. This resolution recalls the fact that rights and freedoms of navigation in that said strait must be respected. And Mr. President, we regret the fact that the Council has been blocked from supporting efforts to provide security and safety of navigation in the Strait of Hormuz. And the aim was to encourage strictly purely defensive measures to provide the security and safety for the strait without spiraling towards escalation. It reaffirmed in a useful manner the right of states to protect freedom of navigation, commercial vessels and crew in accordance with international law in the face of attacks and provocations. This resolution contained, inter alia, paragraphs calling for de-escalation in the Strait of Hormuz and the Gulf, the cessation of attacks targeting civilian infrastructure, the resumption of diplomatic efforts geared towards achieving lasting peace in the region. It is hard to understand that two permanent members of the Security Council who state their commitment to diplomacy and peaceful dispute resolution cast their veto in the light of these provisions. The text encouraged states to coordinate efforts to establish security-related initiatives for maritime navigation in the Strait of Hormuz, specifically through the defensive missions. We deplore the fact that this was not adopted today, but we do intend to continue to work alongside international partners to establish an initiative to contribute to security of maritime transit in the strait when conditions permit. Resolution 2817 and international law already allow for this to be the case. Despite the fact that the draft resolution was not adopted, the efforts which we support need to continue, including at the Security Council, to pave the way for a de-escalation and a ceasefire, which is more necessary than ever before, to restore freedom of navigation in the Strait of Hormuz in accordance with the law of the sea, and beyond that, to tackle the multi-pronged threats posed by Iran, including its support for the network of regional allies and nuclear and ballistic missiles programs. France stands ready to contribute to these efforts at the Security Council. Our position has remained steadfast for more than 20 years. These threats will not be addressed militarily. They cannot be addressed militarily. There needs to be a negotiated agreement through which Iran accepts major concessions to address the legitimate concerns of the international community. And here, too, France stands ready to contribute to efforts to that end. Thank you.
I thank the representative of France for the statement. I give the floor to the representative of Greece.
Greece voted in favor of the resolution presented on behalf of Bahrain, Jordan, Kuwait, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and the United Arab Emirates, reiterating its strong solidarity to the countries of the Gulf and reaffirming the importance of safeguarding freedom of navigation and maritime security in the Strait of Hormuz. On this occasion, I would like to thank Bahrain for their tireless efforts to drafting this resolution, and we regret that its adoption was not made possible today. The Strait of Hormuz remains one of the most critical maritime routes and a vital artery for global international trade and energy supply. Any disruption to its normal functioning carries immediate and far-reaching consequences for international peace and security. Freedom of navigation constitutes a public good. We have repeatedly condemned Iran's illegal and unprovoked attacks against the countries of the Gulf region and elsewhere. Any actions by Iran that jeopardize that unimpeded passage of commercial and merchant vessels through the Strait of Hormuz must cease immediately. Greece remains firmly committed to promoting maritime security and freedom of navigation in accordance with international law as reflected in the UN Convention of the Law of the Seas, UNCLOS. It is in this context that Greece today voted in favor of this resolution, which aim was and is to encourage the coordination of efforts defensive in nature to ensure the safe and unimpeded flow of maritime traffic through the Strait of Hormuz and to contribute to stability in global energy markets. All ships should enjoy the right of transit passage through the Strait of Hormuz in accordance with international law as reflected in the UN Convention of the Law of the Sea, which is rightly recognized as the Constitution of the Ocean and codifies customary international law and is thus binding by all states. In concluding, Mr. President, a de-escalation of hostilities remains of paramount importance, both with regards to the wider conflict and the situation in the Strait of Hormuz. All parties must exercise maximum restraint, prevent a further spiral of violence, and urgently work towards reopening credible channels of dialogue. Our aim must remain to find ways to return to the negotiating table with a view to a peaceful settlement in line with international law and the UN Charter. I thank you.
The representative of Greece for the statement. I give the floor to the representative of Denmark.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, Denmark voted in favor of this resolution. We did so with a grave sense of responsibility and a firm commitment to supporting all efforts to ensure freedom of navigation in the Strait of Hormuz and to bring the hostilities in the Middle East to an end. Denmark is deeply concerned by the continuous escalation across the region. For 5 weeks, this conflict has raged, bringing with it more death and destruction by the day and further destabilization of the already volatile and tense situation. Our vote today reflects our belief in the urgent need to address these developments. Mr. President, Iran's attacks continue unabated against countries in the region and beyond. Denmark strongly condemns these continued attacks, which must stop immediately, and we express our full solidarity with all the countries concerned. De-escalation and respect for international law, including international humanitarian law, are now more important than ever. All diplomatic efforts to reduce tensions must be pursued. We welcome any such efforts and call for negotiations to be resumed in good faith. We welcome the Secretary General's appointment of Jean Anot as his personal envoy to lead UN efforts on the conflict in the Middle East and its consequences. Mr. President, many aspects of this conflict have sent shockwaves across the globe. This is particularly true for the closure of the Strait of Hormuz, caused by Iran's actions. This closure is not only a disruption, but a dangerous escalation, measured in lives and livelihoods lost. Global growth and development depend on the freedom of navigation, the repercussions for the global economy, and, increasingly, for food security, in particular across developing countries, are enormous. As a great maritime nation, Denmark is committed to maritime security, to open sea lanes, and to the safety of all seafarers. Mr. President, Iran's actions near and around the Strait of Hormuz constitute a threat to international peace and security. Iran must immediately cease all attacks and any other attempts to impede lawful transit passage in the Strait of Hormuz. It is crucial to permanently restore safe passage and ensure freedom of navigation in the Strait of Hormuz, consistent with Security Council Resolution 2817 and the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea. That is why Denmark voted in favor of this resolution. While we strongly regret that it was not possible to adopt this resolution today due to the vetoes cast by 2 permanent members, Denmark remains committed to safeguarding peace, security, and stability in the Middle East. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Denmark for the statement. I give the floor to the representative of Latvia.
Thank you, Mr. President. Latvia voted in favor of the resolution submitted by Bahrain, and we express our regret that a positive outcome was not reached. It is profoundly troubling that certain members of this Council have chosen to obstruct a resolution designed to ensure the safety and security of navigation in the Strait of Hormuz and advance global stability. Just 3 weeks ago, the Council adopted Resolution 2817, co-sponsored and supported by Latvia, alongside an unprecedented number of countries. In it, the Council called upon Iran to refrain from interfering with international navigation. In the days and weeks that have followed, Iran has doubled down and effectively closed the Strait of Hormuz, shocking the global economy. The continued failure and refusal by the Iranian regime to comply with its obligations under international law, including its breaches of the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, as well as its persistent non-compliance with binding resolutions of this body, constitutes not only a breach of international order, but leaves this Council with a responsibility to act. Mr. President, we must ensure maritime security and freedom of navigation in the Strait of Hormuz. It is categorically unacceptable for Iran, or any state for that matter, to use an international waterway as a bargaining chip and to hold the global economy hostage. Supply chains are being disrupted, global energy prices have spiked, and acute food insecurity around the globe is growing at an alarming rate, especially among those most vulnerable. Iran is setting a dangerous precedent which we cannot allow or normalize, and we commend Bahrain for addressing precisely this crucial reality in its resolution. Finally, alongside the unprecedented closure of the strait, the Iranian regime is continuing its unprovoked strikes against countries in the region. We condemn this attacks against civilians and civilian infrastructure, and reiterate our steadfast solidarity with our partners in the region. We repeat our calls for immediate de-escalation and for protection of civilians. Mr. President, allow me to once more express my sincere appreciation to Bahrain for their efforts on this pressing matter. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Latvia for the statement. I give the floor to the representative of the Russian Federation.
Mr. President, the Russian Federation voted against the draft tabled by Bahrain, Jordan, Qatar, Kuwait, the United Arab Emirates, and Saudi Arabia. The draft resolution relating to the situation in the Strait of Hormuz and the adjacent waters. The position of our country regarding the present-day crisis in the Middle East is principled, consistent, and objective in nature. We condemn the United States and Israel's aggression against Iran. We respect the sovereignty and territorial integrity of all countries in the region, both the Islamic Republic of Iran and other countries of the Persian Gulf. We reject strikes targeting their civilians and their civilian infrastructure and view this as unacceptable. The Russian Federation undertook and continues to undertake efforts, including at the highest levels, to end such actions. We are striving to achieve a prompt establishment of peace in the Persian Gulf and in the Middle East. However, the Russian Federation was not able to support a text that would generate a dangerous precedent for international law of the sea, for any international efforts at peace, as well as for the authority of the Security Council of the United Nations. Back when Security Council Resolution 2817 was being negotiated, we called upon all Council colleagues to adopt a balanced and an objective approach. Similar, equitable messages have already been repeatedly broadcasted by the Secretary General of the United Nations, calling upon the United States and Israel to end the war and calling upon Iran to cease attacks on its neighbors. Disregard for the root causes of the crisis in the Middle East, namely the illegal and reckless acts by the U.S. and Israel targeting Iran, is not possible and not acceptable. Our and the Secretary General's calls fell on deaf ears then. Nevertheless, we understand the situation of the countries of the GCC and Jordan, and therefore we abstained during the vote on Resolution 2817. This was not an easy choice for us. However, this time, our partners from Bahrain and their like-minded partners went much further, having tabled a fundamentally erroneous and dangerous approach to the situation in the region. Essentially, nearly each paragraph of the draft they proposed abounded with unbalanced, inaccurate, and confrontational elements. And we will point to just the main points in this regard. In paragraph 1 of the preamble and paragraph 6 of the operative part, Iran's actions were presented as the sole source for the so-called destabilizing activities and regional tensions. When it comes to the real causes for the current crisis in the Middle East, namely the U.S. and Israel's illegal attacks targeting Iranian soil, this was something which was not mentioned at all. And this, despite the fact that in paragraph 3 of the preambular part, the sponsors themselves highlighted that threats to maritime navigation in the Strait of Hormuz began to emerge precisely on 28 February 2026. This, incidentally, flew in the face of their own statements that the current initiative was designed to become a response to certain decades of threats to freedom of navigation by Iran. In paragraph 6 of the preamble, attempts to interfere with international navigation of the Gulf of Strait of Hormuz were categorically portrayed as threats to international peace and security. There was deliberate disregard for the fact that a significant part of the Strait of Hormuz is within Iran's territorial waters, and this was deliberately overlooked. Turning to paragraph 7 of the preamble, threats on merchant and commercial vessels and interference on freedom of navigation was identified as the sole reason for disruption to global energy supplies. Once again, without noting the root causes of the crisis, which was frankly mentioned by the President of the U.S. himself, publicly recognizing that an end to hostilities would result in the opening of the Strait of Hormuz. Turning to paragraph 9 of the preamble, as well as paragraphs 1 and 4 of the operative part, there were references to the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea, dating 1982. This international legal instrument does not apply to circumstances of armed conflict, which we stated on a number of occasions during the negotiations process. Paragraph 10 of the preamble noted that the source of threats to international peace and security in the context of the current crisis allegedly is Iran. Deletion from this paragraph of the reference to paragraph 7 to chapter 7 of the Charter was not a panacea. Such language, essentially, in any event, can be interpreted by states acting in bad faith as legitimizing the use of force. Paragraph 2 of the operative part speaks for itself. It proposes that the Security Council give a green light for the use of certain protective measures, the scope and breadth of which is unclear to us under the pretext of ensuring safety and security of navigation without any consideration for the sovereignty of littoral states. The qualification about the purely defensive nature of these efforts essentially does not change the situation, especially given the fact that the sponsors themselves made clear that this was referring precisely to offensive measures, which was starkly seen in the language of paragraph 3 of the operative part, which emphasizes that states acting in accordance with paragraph 2 need to act in full compliance with international humanitarian law. In paragraph 7 of the operative part, notes that the Security Council would stand ready to consider further measures against those who undermine navigational rights and freedoms. This is an obvious hint at attempts to leverage sanctions pressure, irrespective of whether this is explicitly stated here or not. Turning to paragraph 7 and 8, not only this refer to the Strait of Hormuz, but also Bab el-Mandeb. So the sponsors deliberately expanded the geographical scope of their draft, thereby giving even greater grounds for expansive interpretation thereof. Turning to paragraph 9 of the operative part, despite the correct reference calls for diplomacy, this referred exclusively to de-escalation of hostilities in the Persian and Oman Gulf regions, as well as the Strait of Hormuz. When it comes to the need to cease the U.S.-Israeli aggression, this was swept under the rug. No mention was made. One thing is clear, Mr. President, regardless of attempts by the sponsors to make the text general in terms of the language, the essence thereof remained unchanged, namely granting carte blanche for the continued aggressive acts and ongoing further escalation. What this would imply from the legal standpoint, as well as the implications for the situation on the ground, is clear to us, especially at a time when we hear statements from the U.S. president about the readiness to destroy Iran if the Strait of Hormuz is not opened. Once again, it behooves us to remind the Council members about the distortion of the Resolution 1973, adopted by the Council in 2011 on Libya, and what the loose and expansive interpretation thereof caused. The limit of trust in states which advance offensive measures under noble pretexts and streamlined language was exhausted then. We have already seen how the United States strove to justify their strikes against Iran with the right to defense in accordance with Article 51 of the UN Charter, generating a preventive interpretation thereof. We stand in solidarity with our Arab states who were implicated by Washington, who were victimized by the tragedy in the region. And despite that solidarity, we cannot but note that attempts to impose the rules of the game in the Strait of Hormuz plays into the hands of those who wish to further undermine security and stability in the Middle East and beyond. The protective measures to protect vessels, like any other property of member states of the United Nations, does not require Security Council resolutions. So it's sufficient to have references to Article 51 of the Charter of the United Nations, which grants the right to self-defense virtually under any circumstances. the spread of operations for security purposes in the Strait of Hormuz without the consent of littoral states is yet another reason for which we were unable to accept and to adopt vote in favor of the draft tabled by Bahrain. Colleagues, the adoption of this kind of a document, which disregards the broad context of the situation, would further antagonize Iran, which was already enduring the daily U.S.-Israeli strikes. On the country's territory, vast numbers of civilians are perishing. There are now nearly 2,000 of such civilians who have died, 1/4 of whom are women and girls. The supreme leader has been killed, and as have many of the country's leadership. Civilian infrastructure is being attacked, including schools, hospitals, universities, energy, nuclear facilities, including the Bushehr power plant. And this is liable to morph into catastrophic humanitarian repercussions for Iran and for the entire region. We wish to underscore that the Security Council did not agree to a single line with an assessment of these violations of international law.
No excuses you will hear from us today, Ambassador Waltz.
I will not dwell in detail on the egregious double standards of this approach. However, this was carried out in a completely illogical manner, even from the standpoint of simple pragmatism. The adoption of such a one-sided resolution would undermine any prospects for the resumption of negotiations for the purposes of resolving the crisis, and would also obstruct important and useful peace initiatives which are currently underway by a number of states, including China, Pakistan, and Turkey. If the Security Council were to adopt a position that was imposed upon it, then there would be no incentive whatsoever for Tehran to engage in contact in any form with Washington, Washington, which twice already betrayed diplomacy. This was in June of 2025 and February of 2026. And as the U.S. began to conduct large-scale strikes against Iran at the height of the negotiations process. Mr. President, from the very start of work on the document, together with our Chinese colleagues, we conveyed to the Bahraini authors and other members of the Security Council our very serious concerns in connection with this initiative. We did not see room for revision of the text, which is why we urged our Arab friends to abstain from advancement thereof. However, our views were not heeded, and the draft was put to the vote. In any event, under these circumstances, we had no choice other than to vote against it. Russia consistently supports comprehensive security for maritime navigation in all international waterways, the opening of corridors for Venezuela and Cuba, an end to attacks targeting commercial vessels of any country. Similarly, we advocate unhampered navigation in the Strait of Hormuz. However, the only way to resolve this situation was with the participation of all littoral states bordering this important transport corridor. It is not possible to do this without Iran. We call upon our Arab and Iranian friends to resolve the issue of navigation and the movement of vessels directly. We stand ready to facilitate such contacts. Mr. President, we understand the concerns of our Arab partners vis-à-vis the question of freedom of navigation. And we, together with China, are proposing an alternative draft resolution on the current situation in the Middle East, including in terms of maritime safety and security. We are confident that providing for genuine freedom of navigation in the strait, which is of such critical importance for countries in the region and the entire world, the only way to achieve this is through a cessation of hostilities and through achievement of a negotiated solution. Our draft will be concise and equitable and balanced in accordance with the principles of international law and the Charter of the United Nations, specifically regarding peaceful dispute resolution. In this connection, we are putting this straight away to in blue, and we will report on plans for voting shortly, and we trust that the membership of the Security Council will provide their support. Thank you.
I thank the representative of the Russian Federation for the statement. I give the floor to the representative of China.
Thank you, President. The month-long conflict in Iran and its spillover effect continue to deal a heavy blow to regional and global peace and stability. It is hitting the global economy, causing increasingly widespread disruptions. This is not in the common interest of regional countries and beyond. The ins and outs of this conflict are crystal clear. The US and Israel, without authorization from the Security Council, and while negotiations between Iran and the US were underway, launched military strikes against Iran, in clear violation of the purposes and principles of the UN Charter and the basic norms of international relations. At the same time, the sovereignty, security, and the territorial integrity of Gulf states must be fully respected. Civilians and non-military targets must be given necessary protection. The safety and the security of shipping lanes and energy infrastructure must also be safeguarded. China does not go along with Iran's attacks on Gulf states, nor does China condone the blockade of the Strait of Hormuz. Like all parties, China hopes that peace and stability will be restored to the strait as soon as possible and navigation will resume. China attaches great importance to this draft resolution submitted by the representative of Bahrain on behalf of the Gulf states. We fully understand their serious concerns, and we are committed to solving the issue properly, and we have participated constructively in the consultations. Under the current circumstances, this draft resolution should clearly identify the root causes of this conflict, seek appropriate solutions to address the root causes, and ensure the safety and security of shipping lanes, and strive to promote dialogue and achieve peace. It is regrettable, though, the draft resolution fails to capture the root causes and full picture of the conflict in a comprehensive, balanced manner. It contains one-sided condemnation and pressure, characterizing the situation as a threat to international peace and security, as well as the use of armed escorts. Such language is highly susceptible to misinterpretation or even abuse. At a time when the United States is openly threatening the very survival of a civilization, the current hostilities imposed on Iran is very likely to further escalate. The draft resolution, should it have been adopted, would send a wrong message and have serious, very serious consequences. The Security Council has recent lessons to learn from issues such as Libya and the Red Sea. Such past mistakes must not be repeated. The Security Council's actions should be aimed at de-escalating the situation and cooling the temperature. They must not provide a veneer legitimacy for unauthorized military operations. The Council's action must not grant a license to use of force and further exacerbate tensions and add fuel to the fire, thereby leading to an escalation of the conflict. The Security Council should not rush to vote on a draft resolution where serious concerns among members have been raised. In light of the above, China had no choice but to vote against the draft resolution. President, this is a war that should never have happened. And as it continues, it will cause immeasurable harm. At present, the situation in the Middle East continues to deteriorate and hostilities are escalating. The fundamental solution to ensuring safe passage of ships through the strait is to achieve cessation of hostilities and of fighting as soon as possible. The US and Israel are the instigators of this conflict. The fundamental reason for the disruption of navigation in the Strait of Hormuz is the illegal military actions taken by Israel and the United States against Iran. China urges the US and Israel strongly to immediately cease its illegal military actions. Having heard what was said by our US colleague, we are much more convinced now that China's position is objective and impartial. reflecting the image of a responsible major power that upholds international fairness and justice. Our vote will stand the test of history. At the same time, China calls on Iran to stop attacking relevant facilities in the Gulf, address the legitimate concerns of Gulf nations, focus on the common interest of the Global South, and take corresponding positive measures to restore normal navigation in the Strait of Hormuz as soon as possible. China applauds the active efforts made by Pakistan, Egypt, Turkey, and Saudi Arabia to promote dialogue and negotiations and restore regional peace. China commends and supports the work carried out by the United Nations in mediation and alleviating the humanitarian situation, and looks forward to these efforts yielding tangible results at an early date. Recently, China has made tremendous efforts to restore peace and stability in the Gulf and the Middle East. China has engaged in intensive consultations and mediation with relevant parties. China, along with Pakistan, have issued a 5-point initiative on restoring peace and stability in the Gulf and the Middle East, calling for a cessation of hostilities, the prompt start of peace talks, the protection of non-military targets, the protection for maritime shipping lanes, and the primacy of UN Charter. The China-Pakistan 5-point initiative is an open initiative and welcome countries and international organizations' response and participation. Taking into account the need of all parties to resolve the relevant issues, Russia and China have jointly submitted a draft Security Council resolution. The text of that draft resolution is objective fair, showing commitments to easing tensions, calling for dialogue and negotiations, and upholding the rights and freedom of navigation. And we hope it will receive the support of the Security Council members. China is willing to work with all parties to make a greater contribution to the early restoration of peace and stability in that region. Thank you, President.
The representative of China for the statement. I give the floor to the representative of the United Kingdom.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you for your leadership on this resolution. No country should be allowed to hold the world economy hostage. Yet that is exactly what Iran is doing, by denying the right of transit passage, a key navigational right under international law, as reflected in the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea. Today, Russia and China chose to shield their ally Iran, rather than join international efforts to open the strait and avert risks to the global economy. We reject the claims made by Iranian Foreign Minister Araghchi last week that the efforts by the Council to open the strait will complicate the situation. It is Iran's actions that have closed the strait. This has already had dire consequences, and the longer this stranglehold continues, the worse this situation will get. In the last 24 hours, we have heard only 9 vessels pass through the Strait of Hormuz, an international shipping route that would normally see up to 150 vessels a day. The World Food Programme has estimated that this hostile act could push 45 million more people into extreme hunger by June. We supported Bahrain's initiative, and it is deeply regrettable that this resolution did not pass. The United Kingdom is already supporting our allies in the Gulf to defend themselves, in accordance with the existing and inherent right to individual and collective self-defense. We all want to see the de-escalation of tensions in the Strait, and we welcome current diplomatic efforts underway and stress the importance of respect for international law, including the international law of the sea as reflected in the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea. As my Foreign Secretary said last week, when the UK convened over 40 countries in support of the reopening of the Strait of Hormuz, we are determined to see every possible diplomatic, economic, and coordinated measure to get the straits reopened. We will not cease in these efforts. Thank you.
I thank the representative of the United Kingdom. I now give the floor to the representative of the Islamic Republic of Iran.
In the name of God, the compassionate and merciful, thank you, Mr. President. I congratulate Bahrain's presidency for this month. The draft resolution put before the Council was flawed, factually, legally, and politically. The draft is entirely one-sided, biased, and indefensible. It distorts the realities on the ground by falsely attributing responsibility to Iran, the victims of the aggression, while deliberately ignoring the root causes of the current crisis. The text unjustifiably and misleadingly portrays Iran's lawful measures in the Strait of Hormuz, which have been taken in the exercise of its inherent right of self-defense in accordance with the UN Charter, as threats to international peace and security. At the same time, the text seeks to legitimize subsequent unlawful action by the aggressors and their allies under pretext of safeguarding freedom of navigation and maritime safety in the Strait of Hormuz and the Persian Gulf. Iran's lawful actions cannot be viewed in isolation from the broader context of ongoing aggression against its territory and sovereignty. Attempts to portray them as threat to international peace and security are therefore legally unfounded and devoid of any credibility. Mr. President, the objective of this draft is obvious: to punish the victim for defending its sovereignty and vital national interests in the Persian Gulf and the Strait of Hormuz, while providing political and legal cover for further unlawful acts by the aggressors. Had this draft been adopted, it could have opened the door to dangerously broad and abusive interpretation that could be used to justify further use of force and unlawful actions in clear violation of the UN Charter and international law. It is deeply regrettable that neither Resolution 2817 nor this draft nor the statement of certain Council's members contain any reference to the initiators of the aggressions or the destabilizing conduct in the region, as well as the root causes of the current situation. This clear omission reflects a persistent pattern to politicization and double standards with the Council. Let me be clear, this text would only embolden the United States and the Israeli regime to continue in their unlawful actions and atrocious crime while shielding from accountability. In substance, this was a United States draft introduced under the other names. 2 days, the President of the United States again resorted to language that is not only deeply irresponsible but profoundly alarming, declaring that, quote, "the whole civilization will die tonight, never to be brought back," unquote. It is regrettable and alarming that while in full view of international community, the President of the United States shamelessly and brazenly issues threats to destroy all civilian infrastructure in Iran, including bridge, power plants, and energy facilities, by setting a deadline, and openly reveals this intent to commit war crimes and crime against humanity. The penholder of the draft resolution and its supporters have rushed to bring forward such an entirely politicized text for a vote. Its adoption would have set a dangerous precedent, normalizing the use of force based on the vague and unsubstantiated allegation, undermining the integrity of the UN Charter and highlighting the risk of the broader regional and international escalation. For these reasons, we consider the draft legally indefensible, politically unbalanced, and strategically destabilizing. We express our appreciation to China and the Russian Federation for their responsible conduct, for their constructive approach, and for exercising the veto in a manner consistent with the principle of the UN Charter. Their action today prevented the Security Council from being misused to legitimize aggression. In fact, Russia and China ensured the Security Council would not be instrumentalized to legitimize aggression, and in doing so, they stood firmly on the right side of the history. We acknowledge and thank Pakistan and Colombia abstained. recognizing the serious implication the draft would have had for regional peace and stability. By contrast, those who supported the draft resolution choose to put the blame on Iran while remaining silent on the ongoing war crimes and criminal and the terrorist attack being committed by the United States and Israel against civilians and critical infrastructure in Iran. Their position and their votes today reflect a clear double standard. It exposes a stark gap between their stance commitment to the UN Charter and international humanitarian law and their conduct in practice. Such selective application of legal principles not only undermines their credibility but also calls into question the good faith of the invocation of international law and the UN Charter. Mr. President, we categorically reject all unfounded and politically motivated allegations against my country made in this meeting. These claims lack any legal basis and serve only to divert attention from the realities on the ground, namely the illegal and savage war launched by the United States and the Israeli regime against Iran. Their purpose is clear: to whitewash the atrocious and war crimes committed by the US and Israel against the people of Iran and to obscure and deflect from serious violations committed against the Iranian people. Having said, Mr. President, I would like to make the following points. First, the Islamic Republic of Iran, as a responsible state committed to the United Nations Charter and the international law, has consistently upheld freedom of navigation and maritime security in the Persian Gulf, the Strait of Hormuz, and the Gulf of Oman. For decades, the Strait of Hormuz has remained open to all vessels, with freedom of navigation and maritime safety effectively maintained. Currently, the Strait of Hormuz remains open. However, the ongoing unlawful and brutal war waged by the United States and the Israeli regime against Iran has created a dangerous situation that has directly affected maritime safety in the region. In accordance with its inherent right of self-defense, Iran has taken necessary and proportionate measures to prevent aggressors and their supporters from using the Strait of Hormuz for hostile purposes. As a coastal state, Iran has restricted passage for vessels linked to those acts of aggression in accordance with international law. Therefore, vessels associated with the aggressors don't qualify for innocent passage and will be treated in accordance with applicable legal frameworks. Non-hostile vessels not involved in or supporting aggressions may continue safe passage in coordination with relevant authorities in Iran. Responsibility for any disruption or escalation in this vital waterway lies with the United States and Israel, whose actions have undermined regional stability and endangered freedom of navigation. Lasting stability depends on ending aggression and fully respecting Iran's legitimate rights and interests. Second, Iran has consistently pursued to resolve differences through political and diplomatic means, including with parties that have had serious disputes, in order to prevent escalation into conflict. This unjustified and unwarranted war was imposed on Iran by the United States and Israel. In June 2025, Iran was engaged constructively and in good faith in negotiation when it was attacked on the basis of unfounded allegations concerning its peaceful nuclear program, allegations that were later followed by contradictory claims that such capabilities had already been destroyed. The current aggressions was likewise initiated by the United States and the Israeli regime at a time when Iran, for a second time, was actively engaged in negotiation and an agreement was within reach. Once again, diplomacy was undermined and ultimately betrayed by the United States. Claims regarding Iran's nuclear program are baseless and unsubstantiated. For over 2 decades, the Israeli regime has repeatedly alleged that Iran is on the verge of developing nuclear weapons. Yet No credible evidence has been presented to support this assertion. As a committed state party to the Treaty on Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons, Iran has consistently rejected nuclear weapons and has clearly condemned the use of all weapons of mass destruction. Iran has also accepted one of the most rigorous verification and inspection regime of the International Atomic Energy Agency, reflecting its stated position that its nuclear program is exclusively peaceful. Yet, within 9 months, 2 wars of aggression have been imposed on Iran by the United States. An NPT depository and Israel, a regime outside the NPT. In both cases, Iran's peaceful nuclear facilities were attacked. The Security Council, the IAEA Board of Governors, and the Director General of the agency have failed even to condemn these unlawful acts, let alone prevent the recurrence. This inaction has emboldened the aggressors. US officials now openly speak of targeting nuclear facilities, with the US permanent representative even stating that an attack on the Bushehr nuclear power plant is not off the table. Such reckless threats are a direct consequences of international inaction and have severely undermined credibility of the United Nations and the IAEA. Since the start of this unlawful war on 28 February, multiple attacks have been carried out against Iran's nuclear facilities, including repeated strikes in and around Natanz, Bushehr, Arak, and Ardakan. Particularly alarming are repeated attacks in the vicinity of the active Bushehr nuclear power plant. Any strike on nuclear facilities, notably the Bushehr nuclear power plant, would inevitably lead to irreversible humanitarian and environmental consequences. These unlawful actions constitute clear violation of international law, including Security Council Resolution 487 and relevant IAEA resolution, as well as fundamental principles of international law. However, this Council continues to defending silence, and today certain members point finger at Iran. Third, over the past 39 days of this brutal war against Iran, the US-Israeli aggressors have crossed all legal, moral, and humanitarian boundaries, committing grave violation and war crimes. From the outset, they have deliberately and indiscriminately targeted civilian objects, including schools, hospitals, airports, and sport facilities, such as primary schools in Minab. In view of the international community, the United States has slaughtered more than 168 innocent girls' schools in Minab. More than 700 schools and educational centers, along with universities, healthcare facilities, and cultural and historical sites have been attacked, reflecting clear hostility towards Iran's people, identity, and development. They also struck key industrial and production facilities built over decades despite severe sanctions. At the same time, the US officials have made threats to destruction of infrastructure indispensable to the survival of the civilian population. Such threats, including the US President's call for widespread destruction of essential civilian infrastructure, constitute incitement to war crimes and potentially genocide, and must be explicitly condemned under international law. Fourth, from the outset of this unwarranted and savage war on 28 February, the United States utilized military bases and facilities located in countries of the Persian Gulf region. Evidence indicates that military movement and operational preparation were underway at these bases for the planning, preparation, equipping, and execution of unlawful military attacks against the Islamic Republic of Iran, despite Iran's prior warning that such unlawful action were being planned. Iran has formally reported these developments with supporting documentation to the Security Council and Secretary General. Under international law, states are prohibited from allowing their territory to be used directly or indirectly to cause damage to other states. In addition, they must take all necessary measures to prevent foreign armed forces bases in their territory from committing acts of aggression against other states and must not facilitate or support such acts. In the event of the breach of this fundamental obligation, they bear international legal responsibility. Fifth, Iran welcomes the effort by the Secretary Generals, including the appointment of a personal envoy, to secure an immediate end to this brutal war and uphold international peace and security. Iran stands ready to engage constructively with all genuine diplomatic efforts, including through Pakistan, Turkey, and Egypt, as well as diplomatic efforts by China and Russia, and support any credible initiative capable of bringing about the sustainable end to this unlawful and unwarranted war. In this regard, Secretary General Personal Envoy is currently en route to Tehran to pursue consultations. Iran categorically rejects a temporary ceasefire, particularly in light of the June experience, when hostilities resumed under false pretext. A ceasefire in this context serves only to rearm and prepare for the continuation of further crimes. Any viable solution must ensure a definitive and irreversible end to the aggression and establish a just and durable peace grounded in credible and verifiable guarantees against any recurrence. The United States and Israeli regime must bear full responsibility for harm and suffering inflicted upon Iranian civilians, objects, and critical infrastructure, and must be held fully accountable. Individual criminal responsibility for serious violation of international humanitarian law, including war crimes and crimes against humanity committed in Iran, must be pursued without exception in accordance with international law. The Security Council cannot remain passive. Instead of submitting a one-sided and politically motivated draft resolution, it must act to end this brutal war, demand the immediate and unconditional cessation of US and Israeli attacks, and take decisive measures to ensure accountability for all their violations. Finally, with regards to the United States President's explicit threat of massive war crimes and target and destroys Iran critical civilian infrastructure, this threat constitutes a flagrant and egregious violation of the IHL and the most fundamental rules of governing armed conflict. The United States would bear full and undeniable responsibility for committing a manifest war crimes and a crime against humanity. Iran will not stand idle in the face of such egregious war crimes. It will exercise without hesitation its inherent right of self-defense and will take immediate and proportionate reciprocal measures. The Security Council regrettably has, from the very outset of this war of aggression against my country, failed to uphold its primary responsibilities for the maintenance of international peace and security. That failure does not and cannot deprive Iran of its lawful right to act. Iran's response is firmly grounded in international law. There must be no doubt Iran will take all necessary measures to defend its people, safeguard its sovereignty and territorial integrity, and protect its vital national interest with full resolve. The United States and the Israeli regime will bear responsibility for all subsequent consequences, regional and international. I thank you.
I thank the representative of the Islamic Republic of Iran for the statement. I shall now make a further statement in my capacity as Minister for Foreign Affairs of Bahrain. أصحاب السعادة.
Your Excellencies, in the name of the Kingdom of Bahrain, I would like to comment on the statement delivered by the representative of Iran. I would like to comment on his false allegations about the attack of the US bases in the GCC countries. I say the GCC countries have made it clear that they are not party to this war, and these bases have not been used to attack Iran. Iran has been well aware that these bases have been vacated from their military elements. However, you launched thousands of ballistic missiles against us, thousands of drones, unprovoked for more than a month, unabated. You attacked our countries in the month of Ramadan. You have not observed the sanctity of this month. You attacked us on the days of Eid. You are an Islamic country. We share neighborliness with you. We share faith, culture, and history. Yet you ignored all these ties. You claimed that you are attacking military bases. Our infrastructure, power installations, civilian infrastructure, plants, refineries, hotels, universities, residential buildings, are they military bases? Are the residential neighborhoods with all those who live there, women, children, elderly people, are they military bases? You have violated the Charter of the UN, international law, international humanitarian law, law of the sea, principles of good neighborliness. You have not observed the ethical, religious, and moral values. You have not observed Resolution 2817 and the Human Rights Council Resolution L38. You closed unrightfully the Strait of Hormuz. It is an international waterway. It is a good of all peoples of the world. It's not a property of Iran. You took international economy as a hostage in a terror-like manner. You denied the world countries sources of energy, medical and food supplies. You disrupted international trade. You inflicted severe harm to international trade. You pushed 45 million persons, in particular in the south, to famine and starvation. Under the watch of the whole world, you attacked neighboring countries of yours who share good relations with you, economically, trade, socially, and even politically. In the GCC countries, we adopted wisdom and patience in the face of the destructive attacks by your missiles. Our countries have not launched one single bullet against Iran. However, our brave national forces defended our independence, sovereignty, and stability. They protected our citizens and those who are living in our territories. We have the full right to defend our countries and our peoples according to Article 51 of the Charter, which is stressed in Resolution 2817. Today, we are not talking about your deliberate attacks against our countries. We are discussing your illegal terrorist actions by closing the Strait of Hormuz, which harmed international trade and jeopardizing the lives of millions of people.
Resume my function as President of the Council. The representative of the United States has asked for the floor to make a further statement.
Thank you, Mr. President. We heard a lot today. We heard from the ambassador from Iran a lot about their issues with this ongoing conflict with the U.S. But colleagues, that's not what this resolution is about today. This is not about Iran and the U.S. today. This is about Iran and the Gulf Cooperation Council and Bahrain and the world. And here, we also heard about some dangerous precedents, but here's what I want the world to understand in terms of the dangerous precedent that was just set today by opposing this good faith effort from the Kingdom of Bahrain and the Gulf countries to ensure their shipping can flow freely. One can only imagine a future conflict where a party to the conflict decides it's going to impose collective punishment on the entire world and then use that as leverage in the conflict. One can only imagine a situation where a party decides to shut down the Straits of Gibraltar or the Bering Strait or the Malaccan Strait to further its ends. One can only imagine conflicts where a party decides to hold the rest of the world hostage because of a dispute. And colleagues, this is a situation the world cannot and should not live with, that the Gulf Arabs cannot tolerate. Freedom of navigation is fundamental to a nation's sovereignty and survival. So, Mr. President, the United States will support all measures for your country and for those affected to ensure it has the freedom of navigation, the freedom of transit in line with international law. So my message to the Iranian regime is, as people go hungry and as economies suffer, it is squarely on your shoulders. I thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of the United States for the statement. I believe that the representative of the Islamic Republic of Iran has asked for the floor to make a further statement.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Mr. President. I think that once more this war showed that the U.S. will not bring security and stability for the regional countries. We have no hostilities with our neighbors. The fact is very clear that we are targeting the U.S. bases, U.S. interest, and U.S. assets in reciprocal action. In response to the representative of the United States, I only want to refer to some remarks of the U.S. President, which has initiated this war of aggression against Iran. On 21st of March, he threatened to hit and obliterate Iran's power plants. On 30th of March, he escalated these threats, vowing to blow up and completely obliterate critical infrastructure, including power plants, oil facilities, Hark Island, and desalination installation. On 1st April, he declared his intention to bring Iran back to the Stone Age, explicitly threatening to strike all electric generating facilities. On 5th of April, he again openly threatened to target civilian infrastructure, stating that Tuesday will be power plant day and bridge day. There will be nothing like it. And 2 days resorted to a language that is not only deeply responsible but profoundly alarming, declaring that the whole civilization will die tonight, never to be brought back. Such rhetoric is unfitting of any political leader, let alone the head of a permanent member of the Council entrusted with the maintenance of international peace and security. I thank you.
Thank the representative of the Islamic Republic of Iran for the statement. There are no more names inscribed on the list of speakers. The meeting is adjourned.